Hello, and welcome back to Tune Up here on the Corgi YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about Turn 0, or the setup behind a game of Star Wars Legion. Now, the setup can be broken down into two categories. You have your bid, and you have your setup cards. And each of those topics have a lot of things we could discuss, so we're going to jump right in. Now, in the game of Star Wars Legion, the player that brings the lower point value list to a game gets to determine many things such as their table side and which battlefield setup cards are brought to the game. Now, one important thing to look at real quick here is the table side. Table side matters because as you look at all of these deployment cards that could be brought to the table currently, you'll notice that on 4 of these 5 table side cards, you will be starting in the bottom right hand corner of the map with, obviously more places that you could possibly deploy to. The only exception to this is disarray, as it kind of messes up the battlefield. It also messes up that one fact that we have right now on table deployment. And so that'll be true for whether you're the red player or the blue player. Whenever this card, any of these 4 of 5 cards are picked, you'll be deploying or able to deploy in your bottom right hand corner. Also, what's important for the bid is the veto order. It's better to be red when it comes to vetoing cards. Blue has to veto first, which means that red gets that final veto that will kind of determine for the final say what is going to be played in the game. But the blue player is the first to place their objectives, and sometimes this is really important as many of the objectives don't allow themselves to be placed within range 1 or 2 of another objective. So getting that first placement really kind of helps shape what the opponent is able to do in placing their objectives. And then finally, the blue player is going to be first to deploy. Now, this can more often than not be a hindrance rather than a benefit, because you usually want to kind of save activations and be able to play those later to kind of respond to what your opponent is doing. And so the first to deploy is often the first to run out, especially when the activation counts are pretty close. So as we're talking about the bid, it's important to talk about what cards that we might bring to the table in case we win the bid, or what things our opponent might play against us, and how our list specifically interacts with these cards. So down below, I have the 5 objective cards that are currently out for Legion now, and I wanted to kind of show you just what units can interact and try to score these objectives, just so we can kind of look at this from a bird's eye view. So I used the corpse tokens to represent troopers of any kind, be they leaders, special forces, or such. And I've used the heavy units to represent vehicles or anything that doesn't have that trooper keyword. So as we look at each objective here real quick, intercept the transmissions. This is something that only troopers can score. Vehicles cannot score this. Breakthrough is something that both troopers and vehicles can score at. Key positions is also something that troopers and vehicles can score at as long as those troopers or vehicles are touching a piece of terrain at the end of the game. Or, I'm sorry, one of the objective pieces of terrain. Recover the supplies. Only troopers can pick up those supplies, so vehicles are out. And then finally, sabotage the moisture evaporators. Only troopers can heal or damage evaporators. Vehicles are out. So immediately as we look at this, we see that of the 5 possible objectives that are out now, vehicles are only able to score on 2 of those 5 objectives. So if you're bringing a vehicle heavy list, these are kind of things that you must almost fill in on your list. Well, just know that your opponent is probably going to be gunning for these 3 objectives, and these are ones that you're going to want to veto. And this is also why you see with so many lists out right now in the metas that are forming in tournaments, so many of them are trooper heavy, as troopers are able to score on every one of these objectives. And so it really helps when you can kind of stack those and kind of outnumber your opponent on troopers. So as we've looked at the objective cards and how it kind of differentiates between whether troopers can score them or troopers and vehicles, as we look at the condition cards for the battlefield or a particular deployment card, they will also differentiate between whether they benefit troopers or hinder troopers or vehicles as well. So as we look below, hostile environment, one where you can't remove suppression tokens from your units during the end step unless they're touching a piece of terrain, vehicles aren't getting suppression tokens. So a vehicle heavy list would actually like to see hostile environment played because it is mostly just a benefit to them. But as we look at the next 4 condition cards, they actually affect vehicles and troopers all the like. Minefield can blow up on troopers or vehicles. Limited visibility reduces troopers or vehicles. Rapid reinforcements, as long as you're not a commander or an operative, you can drop out of the skies. Yes, you can be an ATST dropping down from the skies. Clear conditions, nothing affects everyone. And the one unique deployment card that actually will affect one type of unit and not the other is the advanced positions. And advanced positions will allow your trooper units to make a scout 1 move after deployment, but your vehicles are not able to do so. So as we've looking at how each objective and certain conditions or even a certain deployment are impacted by either troopers or vehicles, that does not make them equal to all troopers or all vehicles. Down below I have shown the 5 objective cards, and I've kind of listed out some units that are especially effective with these particular objectives. So as we look at breakthrough, yes, and sabotage the moisture evaporators. With breakthrough, fast units are able to kind of get into the enemy's deployment zone a lot quicker or easier. And so I showed Boba Fett and Sabine Wren because of their speed 3 and jump abilities. I've also got the air speeder on there. Now speeder bikes, tauntauns, anything that's really fast really likes to see breakthrough. And also sabotage the moisture evaporators, because oftentimes, even though this objective comes down to points, as one player has completely healed their 2 nearest evaporators and one's broken their 2 nearest evaporators, some of these really fast kind of hitting units can kind of play spoiler, can get to an objective quicker, can defend it a lot, to defend a far objective a lot easier. These kind of quick units are able to jump in there and heal or damage evaporator that the opponent was not expecting or does not have a very easy way to prevent. Especially if you're taking 2 speed 3 moves as your last activation of the round, you're really able to get in there pretty quickly. So as we look down, recover the supplies. Now specifically these Pathfinders and Darth Vader, the Emperor's Apprentice, you'll notice that these are units with the infiltrate keyword. Now being able to infiltrate directly on a box on recover the supplies is a huge advantage. And so while all troopers can get the boxes, the ones with infiltrate have a specific edge. And then I went in here and I showed intercept the transmissions or key positions, because these objectives are ones where you kind of focus on the center of the battlefield and try to control that center. Now, with a unit like Palpatine that has speed 1, it's not so bad when you're only trying to get to the middle of the battlefield to be effective. Melee pieces, such as Operative Luke, are able to play these objectives very well, as they just got to find a place with either great cover or blocking cover near the middle of the map, and just kind of wait for their moment to strike enemy pieces that are trying to score objectives. And then even something like the laser cannon team, if you can find a way to set these up so that they're able to shoot at anything that's trying to get to that middle objective, then the fact that it can't move is not going to be a hindrance. It's already guarding the thing that you're looking at. So yeah, although different pieces can score different objectives, certain strategies and certain pieces are going to be more effective at certain objectives than other pieces. So there are certain units that have more of an advantage over certain objectives than other units. When it comes to the battlefield conditions, there are certain conditions that are more of a hindrance to certain units and strategies than others. If we take a look over here, limited visibility, I've got a sniper squad and Leia to show that limited visibility really hurts that either Leia or Veer's 1-pip card that is supposed to kind of start the game with a shot across the map. As snipers have been included in so many lists, reducing all snipers to range 2 in the first round and then range 3 in the second round, it's almost all but guaranteed that you just made it so the snipers are not able to play for a third of the game. As we look at the next one, Minefield, I've placed the stormtroopers up here because it seems that Minefield impacts the stormtroopers the least with their red dice saves, with the fact that they are the cheapest red dice save unit out right now in comparison to the clones, and also the fact that you're only losing white dice for units lost until you get to that DLT, which so many of them have. That while Minefield impacts everybody, it seems to impact the Empire softest. And then finally, Hostile Environment. I have placed Rex and some clones to show that if you're the clone player, you do not want to see this card because you have enough suppression issues as it is, and trying to make sure you get those actions to get your tokens so you can share them. Hostile Environment will do nothing but hurt you. And so as you're trying to set up your objectives in order to make it so that you can score easier than your opponent, you also want to kind of take a look at these conditions and see if you can hurt your opponent more than yourself by playing some of these battlefield conditions. For this last segment of the video, I really wanted to go over some of the tips that I have for deployment. And so as we follow along down below, the first tip that I can give is to hide your strategy. You don't want your opponent to know what you're doing, and you want to be able to kind of play in a way where they have less ability to counter what you're doing. And so this is done by, first off, deploying your obvious units first. Now, an obvious unit I would consider the laser cannon team. So in most games that have some blocking terrain, this laser dish or laser cannon team is only going to be able to find a couple firing lanes, and you just kind of sit there and maybe get 1 or 2 shots during the game. So we want to assume that our opponent is a wise player and they're already kind of knowing our best places we can deploy these dishes. So let's get those activations, those deployments out of the way first, so that your opponent has less things to remaining after they have their deployments to respond to the rest of your deployments. Same thing kind of goes for really fast, really mobile units, such as the air speeder or speeder bikes. These units are so quick with their speed 3 and their compulsory moves that they can make range 3 moves around the battlefield, so it almost kind of doesn't matter where you start them. You're able to be able to pivot and kind of turn and engage where you need to, kind of on those turns 2 or 3. And then the final thing that I'd like to mention is your really mobile trooper unit pieces, such as Boba Fett or Sabine Wren. These pieces can be placed either early because they're so mobile they can adapt to whatever your opponent is doing, or they're so mobile that you can save them for your last deployment or one of your very last deployments, so that they're able to kind of counter what your opponent has already put on the field, because maybe in a move or two they're going to be able to place themselves wherever they need to go. So the second tip that I have is to measure your ranges. So a lot of these deployments, you know, such as battle lines or kind of some of these with Scout that'll place you kind of right towards the middle of the battlefield, they're able to shoot each other turn 1, either by moving or shooting, or sometimes just able to shoot that range 4 shot, maybe 5 shot right off the bat. And so it's important to know, as you're putting your range tool down while you're deploying, to know where your opponent can go and where they can shoot you in turn 1. Turn 1 should probably be more of a setup turn than one where shots are actually being fired. And then finally, consider your command bubble. Your command bubble is important. It prevents your troopers from running away with just a few suppression tokens on them. You know, if we look backwards, it used to be a very common thing where the rebels had to bunch their units up together, because when that AT-ST came out, so many of them were taking the mortars, the rocket launchers, and just firing 2 suppression on a rebel trooper unit that is not within range 3 of the leader. And then if that rebel trooper unit doesn't roll off their suppression, you just lost, you know, anywhere between 40 to 80 points worth of rebel troopers just at the very start of the game. It's a bad feel. And so definitely consider your command bubble and where your deployments are going to be weak to that panic and where suppression can hurt them most. So let's wrap up the video. So that's going to do it for today's video, guys. I hope that you enjoyed it. We covered Turn 0, which is the setup of Star Wars Legion. We covered the bid and how bid impacts the cards that are brought. Also the table side and certain key components for being red or blue player. We covered how the objectives that are brought interact with either troopers or vehicles. The same thing for conditions. We covered the ways that particular units with certain speeds or certain ranges are more effective at certain objectives than others. Objectives than others. And then finally, we covered some useful tips for deployment in order to try to gain an edge over your opponent. So thank you so much for joining us today, guys. On the next video, we'll jump in a bit more with unit efficiency and kind of talking about what a unit can do aside from just its normal firing, and different ways to play with your units in particular. So thanks as always, guys, and have a great day.